They called it the flying coffin. The Germans laughed at it. Even some American crews weren't sure it could survive a real fight. The B-24 Liberator, a lumbering, awkward-looking beast that looked more like a factory with wings than a sleek bird of war. German aces joked it was the cow that tries to fly. They said it'd fall apart long before it ever reached Berlin. But one day it did. And when it did, it didn't just reach Berlin. It burned a hole through the myth of German invincibility. This is the untold story of how the underestimated B-24, mocked by Luftwaffe legends and doubted by its own pilots, became the steel backbone of the air war that broke the Reich's heart. A story of fear, laughter, loss, and triumph. A story that began with mockery. Spring, 1942. Somewhere over the North Sea, a formation of B-24s, brand new, shiny, still smelling of factory paint, was struggling through icy winds. The engines roared like thunder. The wings flexed violently in the cold. Inside one of those bombers, Lieutenant Jack Arnett gripped the control yoke so tight his knuckles went white. His co-pilot, Charlie, Tex, Morgan, spat a toothpick out and muttered through the oxygen mask. "Feels like flying a barn door with engines." Jack chuckled nervously. "Yeah, a barn door that leaks fuel." Below them, German radar had already spotted the new intruders. Luftwaffe pilots scrambled from bases in Holland, France, and Norway. Among them was Oberleutnant Hans Keller, a confident, scar-faced ace with 37 kills to his name. He squinted at the radar screen and laughed. "Liberators? Ah, wunderbar. Big targets, slow as cows. Easy hunting today." That was the mood of the time. Germany ruled the skies. The Bf-109s and Fw-190s were legends, symbols of speed, grace, and precision. The Americans? Still the newcomers, the amateurs across the ocean. When the first Liberators arrived in Britain, even some RAF veterans rolled their eyes. "She's no Lancaster," one British ground officer muttered. And to be fair, the B-24 didn't look the part of a hero. Its wings were long, thin, and high-mounted, efficient but fragile. Its fuselage, a boxy tube. The landing gear looked spindly. The crew joked the tail gunner had the best view of their funerals. But what the Germans didn't understand yet, what even many Americans hadn't realized, was that this ugly duckling had a secret weapon. Not its guns. Not its armor. Its legs. By 1942, the world was in chaos. Europe burned under the Nazi flag. The Pacific was boiling with war. The United States had only just entered the fight and was still scrambling to prove itself. Factories roared 24 hours a day. Men who'd never flown more than a paper plane were training to handle the most advanced bombers on Earth. The B-17 Flying Fortress was the media darling, the symbol of American air power. Newspapers called it invincible. The Liberator, by contrast, was the quiet workhorse nobody wrote songs about. But in raw numbers, the Liberator would become the most produced heavy bomber in history, over 18,000 built. Because it could do what few others could. The B-24's Davis wing, an aerodynamic marvel, gave it an extended range no other bomber could match. 2,200 miles. That meant it could strike deep. From North Africa to the oil fields of Ploesti. From Italy to the heart of Germany. That range was destiny. The 98th and 376th bomb groups, the Pyramiders and Liberandos, are preparing for their first major mission, hitting Rommel's supply lines in Tunisia. Ground crews wipe sweat from their brows, tightening bolts, loading ammo belts. One young mechanic, barely 19, whispers, "God, please let this thing fly straight." They had reason to pray. Early Liberator missions were nightmares. Engines overheated, fuel leaks caught fire, and the planes handled like lead bricks when damaged. And the Luftwaffe was waiting. At 12,000 feet, as the formation crossed into enemy airspace, Keller's squadron of Me-109s dived from the sun, the classic German tactic. Tracer rounds tore the sky open. 2 B-24s went down in the first minute. Inside the lead bomber, Captain John "Big Dog" Miller yelled over the intercom, "Hold the line. Keep formation." That was the secret. Stay tight. Cover each other. The B-24's dozen .50 caliber Brownings could turn the air around them into a deadly web. Tex Morgan, manning the top turret, let out a yell, "Got one! Got one off your right wing!" But the price was brutal. Flak bursts pounded them, engines coughed, hydraulic fluid sprayed. At mission's end, only half the formation returned. Miller's bomber limped home, fuel streaming from bullet holes, landing gear half-jammed. On the ground, the survivors kissed the dirt. And even through the exhaustion, something had changed. The Germans hadn't laughed this time. War changes men fast. In a matter of months, these barn door pilots became hardened veterans. They learned how to fly low to avoid radar, how to feather a dead engine midair, how to bail out at 10,000 feet and pray the desert didn't swallow you whole. The Liberator became their home, their coffin, their comrade. One pilot wrote in his diary, "You stop thinking of her as a plane. You start thinking of her as a friend who always brings you home even if she's bleeding oil." That bond, between man and machine, was something the Luftwaffe never understood. German aces often saw their aircraft as extensions of themselves. But the American crews saw the B-24 as one of the team. The navigator, the gunners, the pilot, the engineer, all linked by faith in that ugly, stubborn plane. And that faith would soon be tested in the most daring air raid of the entire war. Hitler's war machine ran on Romanian oil, pumped from the Ploesti fields. Without it, the panzers would stop rolling, the Luftwaffe would be grounded. But Ploesti wasn't just any target. It was fortress oil. Over 50,000 anti-aircraft guns ringed the area. The Germans knew it was vital. And when Allied planners proposed a daylight, low-altitude bombing run, even veteran pilots thought it was suicide. One colonel reportedly said, "You might as well send them with shovels to bury themselves." And yet, the Liberators volunteered. But because only the B-24 could fly the 2,200-mile round trip from Libya, hit the refineries and return. This would be their moment. Their chance to prove to every laughing German ace that the Liberator wasn't a joke. It was a judgment day. And it would come on August 1, 1943, a day the Germans would later call Black Sunday. As the sun rose over the Libyan desert that morning, 177 Liberators began to lift off, one by one. Engines howling, crews silent. Some would never see another sunrise. But together, they were about to fly straight into history. The sun rose like a torch over the Libyan desert. It was August 1, 1943. The air shimmered with heat, sand whispering across the runways at Benghazi, Salek, and other secret airstrips where the 8th and 9th Air Forces waited. 177 B-24 Liberators stood lined up in the dawn light, their aluminum skins glinting orange and gold. Ground crews moved like ants, tightening bolts, checking fuel lines, kissing metal fuselages like Lucky Charms. The engines coughed to life, one by one. A low rumble turned into a hurricane of sound. Inside one of those bombers, Lieutenant Jack Arnett, now promoted after his North African ordeal, tightened his flight gloves and looked out through the cockpit glass. He didn't say a word. His co-pilot, Tex Morgan, broke the silence. "Think the Krauts are ready for this, Jack?" Arnett just smirked. "They'll be ready. Doesn't mean they'll stop us." The briefing the night before had been simple and terrifying. They were to fly over 1,200 miles across the Mediterranean, slip in under radar, drop to treetop level, and hit the oil refineries of Ploesti, Romania, the heart of Hitler's fuel supply. General Jacob Smart had called it Operation Tidal Wave. 5 bomb groups, 98th, 376th, 44th, 93rd, and 389th, would fly so low their propellers might clip treetops. They trained for weeks, memorizing maps, silhouettes, escape routes. But no one really believed all of them would come back. In the mess tent that night, Captain John Big Dog Miller had lifted a tin cup and said, "Here's to tomorrow. Let's show those sons of guns what an American cow can do." The laughter was thin. Everyone knew the odds. As dawn broke, the first bombers rolled down the dusty runway, lifting heavy into the sky. One by one, they climbed to 5,000 feet, heading north. The roar of 700,000 combined horsepower echoed across the desert. The men inside knew the mission was a gamble with death. Yet there was pride, fierce, unyielding pride. They weren't just flying to destroy oil. They were flying to prove something. That the Liberator could do what the Germans thought impossible. They flew in radio silence, trusting formation and instinct. Over the Ionian Sea, over the Greek coast, past the mountains of Albania. The sun rose higher, the temperature in the unpressurized cabins soaring above 100 degrees. Sweat poured into eyes, salt stinging cuts and scrapes. Tex Morgan leaned back and muttered, "It's gonna be a hot day in hell." He didn't know how right he was. As they approached the mountains of Yugoslavia, tragedy struck. Navigation errors, wind drift, and low clouds broke the carefully planned formation. The lead group veered off course, and soon the entire armada was divided into fragments. Some turned too early, others too late. The 376th and 93rd, led by Colonel Keith Compton and General Yücel Ent, missed the main approach. When they realized it, it was too late to regroup. They pressed on anyway. Meanwhile, the Germans were wide awake. Radio operators in Bucharest were screaming into their transmitters. Radar screens lit up. By the time the first Liberators crossed the border into Romania, hundreds of anti-aircraft guns had swiveled toward the sky. Major Alfred Gerstenberg, the Luftwaffe commander in charge of Romanian air defenses, had trained his crews for exactly this kind of raid. He didn't know when the Americans would come, but he turned Ploesti into a fortress. Anti-aircraft guns were hidden in haystacks, train cars, even church towers. Machine guns lined rooftops. Fighter bases ringed the area like iron teeth. And now the hunters waited. As the first wave of Liberators broke from the mountains into the Ploesti plain, they dropped to less than 300 feet. Some even lower. From the ground, villagers looked up in disbelief. Giant bombers, thundering just above the rooftops, casting shadows that rattled windows. Jack Arnett's plane skimmed so low he could see faces below. Children. Farmers diving for cover. Cows scattering in panic. Tex shouted, "Jesus, Jack, we're lower than the church steeple." Jack gritted his teeth. "Stay with the line." In the distance, the horizon erupted in smoke. The lead bomb group had reached the target, and all hell broke loose. Flak bursts ripped open the sky. Black clouds exploded around the bombers, punching holes in fuselages, shredding wings. The air smelled of cordite and burning oil. Gunners yelled over the intercom, voices cracked with panic. Tails hit. Right engines on fire. Hold her steady. Tex's turret guns barked, spitting out hot brass. He saw German gunners below, crouched behind sandbags, firing straight up. One tracer slammed into the nose glass, missing Jack by inches. Jack's voice was calm but cold. "We're hit, but we're still flying." All around them, Liberators burned. One crashed into a refinery tower and exploded, the fireball rolling skyward like a volcano. Another lost a wing and cartwheeled into a field. The sky became a slaughterhouse. And yet, they kept coming. Each surviving crew locked onto their target, flying through walls of smoke and fire. In the 98th Bomb Group, a Liberator called Kickapoo took a direct hit before reaching the target. The pilot, Lieutenant George McGovern, future U.S. Senator, watched helplessly as his comrades vanished into the inferno. Another bomber, the Sandman, piloted by Captain Robert Sternfels, tore through the smoke at rooftop height, its wings blackened, engines coughing. Sternfels and his crew flew straight over the Astra Romana refinery, dropping their payload at point-blank range. The explosion shook the earth. Oil tanks burst, flames racing skyward, turning the noon sun into a black eclipse. The shockwave hit their bomber so hard it nearly flipped. Sternfels yanked the controls, barely escaping before another explosion swallowed the area. In the chaos, German fighters joined the battle, Me-109s and FW-190s diving like hawks. They expected easy prey. But the Liberators, bloodied and furious, fought like hornets. Top turret gunners tracked and fired, their .50 calibers tearing through German wings. Tail gunners screamed with adrenaline, counting kills through the haze. One Luftwaffe ace, Hans Keller himself, dove on a straggling B-24, Teggy N. He fired a burst straight into the right wing. The Liberator lurched, trailing smoke. But then from the nose turret, a gunner named Jimmy Sloan opened fire, hitting Keller's cockpit. The Me-109 burst into flame and spiraled into the oil fields below. Keller didn't mock the Liberator again. For hours the battle raged. Liberators came in waves, smashing refinery after refinery. But the cost was staggering. By the time the survivors regrouped over the Danube on their way home, nearly a third of the force was gone. Out of 177 bombers, 53 were destroyed. Over 500 airmen killed, wounded, or captured. Jack Arnett's Liberator barely made it. 2 engines dead, hydraulics gone, fuel leaking like a sieve. They limped across the Balkans, losing altitude mile by mile. Tex looked over, face pale. "We're not gonna make it to base." Jack nodded. "Maybe not, but we're gonna make it to friendly land." They ditched near a field in Cyprus, skidding through olive trees before the fuselage cracked open. The crew crawled out, dazed, burnt, bloodied, but alive. They looked at their blackened B-24, smoke curling from its engines. No one said anything for a long moment. Then Tex spoke softly, "Still think she's a cow?" Jack smiled through the pain. "A cow that just kicked Hitler in the gut." They both laughed, quiet, shaky laughter, the kind that comes when death passes by and leaves you standing. The mission was officially deemed a partial success. The oil production at Ploesti was disrupted for months, though not destroyed completely. But symbolically, it was a thunderclap. The Germans had seen American bombers fly into the most heavily defended target in Europe, at treetop height, and still deliver their blow. Even the Luftwaffe's reports grudgingly called the raid extraordinary in bravery and determination. Black Sunday became legend. The losses were unbearable, but the message was undeniable. The B-24 was not a joke, not a clumsy farm machine. It was a long-range, steel-fisted instrument of willpower. When the surviving airmen returned to their bases, ground crews wept at the sight of them. Bent propellers, bullet holes, engines missing, but home. Out of the dust and fire, a new reputation was born. From then on, the Germans didn't laugh. They feared the Liberator. It was a ghost that came from impossible distances, struck hard, and vanished again. By late 1943, the Liberators were everywhere. The Atlantic, Africa, Burma, Italy, England. They hunted U-boats, bombed bridges, ferried supplies, rescued downed pilots. And as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, those long wings would again be needed, for a mission even deadlier than Ploesti. That mission would take them straight into the heart of Hitler's empire, Berlin itself. As winter approached, the 8th Air Force in England was growing stronger, its ranks swelling with fresh crews and new tactics. The B-17 still held the limelight, but the Liberators were now the quiet backbone. Fast, versatile, adaptable. Pilots joked that if you wanted a headline, fly a Fortress. If you wanted to win the war, fly a Liberator. Back in Germany, morale was changing too. The Luftwaffe was stretched thin, fighting on every front. Fuel shortages were starting. Many of the younger German pilots were barely trained. But the arrogance still lingered. They believed Berlin could never be touched. It was too deep, too far, too heavily defended. And yet, in the winter of 1944, a flight of B-24s would cross that line. They would test the limits of their range, their endurance, and their courage, proving once again that the impossible was just another American challenge waiting to be met. But the cost of that proof would be steep. Jack Arnett and Tex Morgan were assigned to the 445th Bomb Group, newly transferred to England. The airfields were muddy, the air freezing, the skies a gray ocean of death. Each mission to Germany felt like walking into a storm with a paper umbrella. They flew in tight boxes of dozens, sometimes hundreds of bombers. Each formation moved like a mechanical beast, glittering, immense, vulnerable. And over Germany, flak filled the sky like black snow. Tex used to say, "It's like flying through hell's fireworks." One February morning, as they prepped for takeoff, word came down. Target, Berlin. Silence swept through the room. The city that had laughed at them, the capital of the Reich, was now within reach of the Liberator's long wings. Arnett looked at Tex and said quietly, "Guess it's time to return the favor." When those engines started up that morning, there was no laughter, no jokes. Just resolve. Thousands of men climbed into their flying coffins, strapped in, and prepared to carry the fight where no American bomber had gone before. They weren't just flying to drop bombs. They were flying to bury arrogance. And for the German aces waiting above Berlin, it was going to be the longest day they'd ever face. As the formations climbed through the English clouds and turned east, the radio crackled with one final message from command. "Godspeed, Liberators. Bring the thunder." The sky ahead was waiting, and the laughter was over. The cold over England in early 1944 was the kind that cut through leather jackets and gloves, biting deep into skin and bone. Fog rolled over the runways at Tybenham, Hardwick, and Horsham St. Faith. Rows of B-24 Liberators crouched like sleeping giants, their silver wings glistening with frost. Pilots and ground crews moved through the haze, breath steaming in the pre-dawn air. Someone coughed. Someone else prayed. The smell of oil, sweat, and fear hung thick. Berlin. That word had weight. For years, it had been untouchable, Hitler's fortress city, his seat of arrogance. No Allied bomber had reached it without paying a blood price. Until now. Inside briefing rooms, officers pointed to maps spread across green felt tables. The red line traced a straight path from eastern England, across the North Sea, through the heart of Germany, right into Berlin. It looked simple on paper, but every man in that room knew those red lines might as well be drawn in blood. Colonel James "Iron Jim" Stewart, yes, the Hollywood actor turned bomber pilot, stood at the front of one briefing, his voice steady but grave. "You'll be flying over the heaviest defenses in the world. Berlin's flak guns are accurate to the yard. The Luftwaffe will throw everything they have at you. But we're going anyway, because it's time they learned their capital isn't safe anymore." There was silence. A few smirks. A few nods. One gunner, young and jittery, whispered, "Guess we'll find out if the Krauts can laugh under fire." By 6 a.m., engines were roaring across East Anglia. The Liberators rose through the fog, forming up in massive boxes, each group of bombers flying in tight formation, their .50 caliber guns covering every angle. It was a sky made of steel and courage. The Germans had mocked the B-24 for its looks. Now, from below, its silhouette, high-mounted wing, twin rudders, long fuselage, had become the shape of dread. Civilians learned to recognize it instantly. "Die Liberatoren," they'd whisper, before the sirens began to wail. As the formations crossed into Germany, the first flak batteries opened up. The sky above Bremen and Hanover turned black. Shrapnel tore through the air, slicing metal, wounding men. Inside Arnett's bomber, the intercom hissed with static and panic. Number 3 engines losing pressure. Tail guns jammed. "Stay tight, boys. Stay tight." Tex Morgan's voice came calm and low through the noise. "Just like training, Jet. Eyes forward." Arnett nodded, hands steady on the yoke. The Liberator shuddered with each hit but held her course. At 20,000 feet, the temperature dropped below zero. Frost crept across oxygen masks. Blood froze before it hit the deck. Then came the fighters. Me-109s, FW-190s, even some twin-engine Me-110s, all diving from the sun, guns blazing. They came fast and fierce. For the next 30 minutes, the sky turned into a spinning madhouse of smoke trails, cannon flashes, and screaming engines. The Liberator's gunners fired back with everything they had. Tracers stitched across the air, red and white lines crossing like deadly threads. 6 o'clock low. Coming in fast. "Got him." "No, wait, he's climbing." Tex's turret guns roared. He tracked a 190 and hit it square on the nose. The German fighter rolled over and plunged toward the clouds. "Splash 1. Tex yelled. But another came in from above, riddling the tail. The top turret gunner, Sergeant McNeil, took shrapnel to the shoulder but kept firing. He grunted through clenched teeth, "Not today, you bastards." Flak bursts drew closer as they neared Berlin. The entire horizon ahead shimmered with smoke and fire. The city was already burning from earlier raids, and the smell of it, a sick mix of oil and ash, reached even at altitude. Below them, the sprawl of Berlin stretched endlessly. Wide avenues, rail yards, factories, government buildings. Target in sight, the bombardier called. Switching to auto. The bomb bay doors opened. Wind screamed through the fuselage. The plane felt lighter, trembling with the strain. Jack held steady, eyes fixed on the horizon. Then, release. Bombs fell in long, glittering strings. Thousands of pounds of high explosives dropped from the Liberators, whistling through the clouds. Seconds later, the earth erupted. The shock waves hit the formation like invisible fists. Smoke and fire spiraled upward, blotting out the sun. Tex looked down through the side window. Guess they're not laughing anymore. The mission was far from over. The return leg was hell. Dozens of bombers went down over eastern Germany. Some hit by flak, others rammed by desperate German pilots. One Liberator was sliced in half by a Me-410. Another exploded midair when its bomb load was hit. Arnett's bomber took 2 direct flak hits near Magdeburg. The right wing was holed through, the number 2 engine on fire. Tex worked the extinguisher, cursing. "Come on, you old girl, don't quit on me now." The fire died down, but the controls were sluggish. The crew prayed through clenched jaws. By the time they crossed the Dutch coast, only a fraction of the original formation was left. Jack looked over his shoulder at the bullet-riddled interior. He saw his crew, exhausted, bloodied, alive. He whispered, "Berlin, boys. We made it to Berlin." The return to England was silent. The surviving Liberators landed in scattered intervals, limping onto runways, wheels smoking, flaps shredded. Ground crews ran out, counting holes, counting faces. Too many planes came back with empty turrets, missing gunners. The cost was horrifying, but the impact was undeniable. For the first time, Hitler's capital had been hit by American bombers in strength. The message echoed across the world. There was no sanctuary left. The Germans had boasted that their cities were safe. They'd mocked the Americans as reckless amateurs. Now, even Goebbels' propaganda machine struggled to spin the sight of Berlin burning under Liberator fire. Newspapers in the US ran headlines that lit up every diner, every factory, every home. Liberators reach Berlin. Families gathered around radios. Mothers cried. Children cheered. The B-24 had crossed the line from underdog to legend. But for the men who flew her, the war was far from over. Through 1944, the missions kept coming: Leipzig, Hanover, Regensburg, Munich. Each flight tested the limits of human endurance. Crews slept in their flight suits, knowing tomorrow might be their last dawn. And the German aces, those who had once joked about the flying coffin, were dying off fast. Fuel shortages crippled their training. The Luftwaffe's once superior tactics broke under the relentless Allied advance. By mid-1944, the balance had shifted. The Liberators now flew with long-range escort fighters, P-51 Mustangs, sleek and fast, able to chase German interceptors all the way back to their airfields. The skies that once belonged to the Luftwaffe were turning American. And in that shift, something poetic unfolded. The very range that had made the B-24 a target of ridicule, the same range that let it fly farther, carry more, endure longer, was now the reason Germany's industrial heart was collapsing. Every time a German ace climbed into his fighter, he had to wonder if he'd have enough fuel to make it back. Every time a Liberator climbed into the sky, its tanks were full, its crew ready, its engine steady. The laughter was gone. The reckoning had come. One afternoon, in late August 1944, after yet another brutal raid over Germany, Jack Arnett sat on the wing of his battered B-24, cigarette dangling from his lips. Tex walked over, limping from a twisted ankle. Tex said, "Heard Berlin's still smoldering. Guess the cow made her point." Jack nodded slowly. They thought she couldn't fly this far. Turns out she could fly all the way to their doorstep. Tex smiled and kicked the door in. They both looked at the sky, empty now, calm, quiet. The same sky that had swallowed so many friends. Jack said softly, "All that laughter didn't last long, did it?" Tex didn't answer. He just placed a hand on the metal skin of the Liberator. "She brought us home. That's what matters." In that silence, you could almost hear the ghosts of engines echoing across the clouds. Thousands of Liberators, thousands of young men who flew them, laughed in them, died in them, and changed the course of history. The B-24 would go on to serve everywhere: the Pacific, the Mediterranean, even the Arctic. It hunted U-boats, carried supplies over the Himalayas, dropped agents behind enemy lines. By war's end, it had flown over every continent except Antarctica. And the German aces? Most were gone. Some captured, some dead, some just broken by exhaustion and loss. Those who survived later admitted in interviews and diaries what they'd once refused to say aloud. The Liberator was not a cow. It was a machine of destiny. One Luftwaffe veteran wrote years later, "We thought it was clumsy. We thought it was easy. But it came again and again when our fuel was gone, when our skies were lost. We came to fear its shadow." That shadow stretched from Africa to Germany, from Ploesti to Berlin, and beyond. And behind it stood the courage of thousands of American crews who believed in a plane that nobody wanted to believe in at first. By the time the war ended in 1945, the B-24 had dropped over 500,000 tons of bombs, flown more missions than any other bomber, and earned a place in history not because it was beautiful, but because it was relentless. Its pilots were ordinary men who became legends, men like Jack Arnett and Tex Morgan, whose real counterparts had names carved into memorial walls across Europe. They flew through storms, fire, and fear. They endured the laughter, the mockery, the doubt. And they proved that the underdog, given enough range, can reach even the mightiest fortress. The day the B-24 reached Berlin, a myth died in the skies over Germany. The myth of invincibility, of arrogance, of superiority. The laughter had ended. But the echo of the Liberator's engines, that deep, roaring chorus of freedom, still lingers, carried on the wind of every sky where men once dared to fly. The war was ending. By spring of 1945, Germany was crumbling like an old wall hit by years of hammer blows. Cities that once glowed with industrial might now lay under blankets of smoke and rubble. The air smelled of dust and ash and the strange silence that follows exhaustion. The roar that once filled European skies, the scream of engines, the pop and hiss of flak, the chatter of machine guns, was fading away. But one sound remained: the deep, steady rumble of the B-24 Liberator. You could still hear it echoing across the Rhine, the Danube, the shattered airfields of France and Italy. The sound of endurance, of willpower turned to wings. By now, men like Jack Arnett and Tex Morgan were ghosts of their younger selves, thinner, older in the eyes, voices quieter. They'd seen too much. They'd lost too many. But they'd also seen the impossible happen. They'd seen a machine once mocked as a joke become the backbone of victory. And they'd seen how American grit, combined with sweat, courage, and engineering, could turn ridicule into redemption. In those final months of the war, as Allied armies advanced from the west and the Soviets crushed Berlin from the east, the Liberators still flew. They flew food to starving civilians, supplies to frontline troops, and aid to liberated camps where the true horrors of Nazi arrogance came to light. Every mission now felt different. No more adrenaline, no more shouting. Just quiet purpose. Jack's crew had one final assignment: an aid drop near a captured concentration camp outside Munich. The men stood at the open bomb bay, looking down at the twisted remains of the Reich. The towns below were gray, empty. The rivers ran with debris. Tex turned to Jack. Hard to believe, huh? All that talk about a 1,000-year empire ended in less than a decade. Jack didn't reply. He just stared down, eyes heavy, hand resting on the cold metal of the yoke. The Liberator's engines droned like an old hymn. He finally said, "They thought we'd never make it here. They thought we were too soft, too far, too dumb to reach them." Tex nodded. "Guess we had the range after all." They both smiled, a tired, knowing smile, the kind that comes from seeing both the worst and the best of humanity. That flight was one of the last for their crew. A week later, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Across airfields from England to Italy, the engines of the Liberators went silent for the first time in years. Pilots who'd survived hundreds of missions stood beside their planes, not knowing whether to cheer, cry, or just stare at the ground. Tex tossed his flight cap onto the tarmac and said softly, "Hell of a ride, old girl." The plane didn't answer, of course. But in the stillness, it felt like she did. When the war ended, more than 18,000 B-24s had been built, more than any other American bomber, more than most aircraft of any kind in history. They had flown from Africa, England, Italy, India, China, and the islands of the Pacific. They had bombed, patrolled, rescued, and delivered. They had become not just symbols of war, but of endurance. And yet, almost as quickly as they had risen, they disappeared. Within a year, most Liberators were scrapped. Their aluminum recycled into cars, pots, and post-war homes. The great wings that had reached Berlin were cut apart with saws. In boneyards across the American West, Kingman, Walnut Ridge, Altus, thousands of Liberators sat in rows, silent, waiting to be melted down. Photographs show acres of them, fuselages glinting under the desert sun like metal tombstones. Some pilots wept when they saw them. Tex did. He stood in Arizona in 1946, staring at a line of decommissioned bombers. He found one with his old squadron number still painted faintly on the side. He reached out, touched the skin of the wing, and said, "You were never supposed to make it. But you did." Then he turned and walked away. The world moved on. The jets came, and with them, a new era of sleek, fast, supersonic machines. The Liberator became a memory, an old photograph on a mantle, a story told at reunions, a name etched into history books. But the legacy of that ungainly, stubborn plane lived on in something deeper. Because the story of the B-24 wasn't just about technology. It was about people. About what happens when ordinary men take something imperfect and make it great through sheer will. It was about facing mockery, doubt, and loss, and refusing to quit. Even decades later, when veterans gathered at reunions, you could still hear the same tone in their voices. Not pride for glory. Not the boasting of victory, just gratitude for survival, for brotherhood, for the machine that carried them home. At one reunion in the 1980s, an old Liberator pilot was asked by a reporter, "Why do you still talk about that plane?" He smiled, lines deep around his eyes. "Because she taught me something," he said. They laughed at her, but she outlasted them. You take what you've got, no matter how rough it looks, and you make it fly. That's the lesson the B-24 left behind. In war and in life, underestimation can be the greatest weapon of all, if you know how to turn it around. The German aces learned that the hard way. In the early days, they laughed in their mess halls over beer and victory reports. The Americans send us these flying boxes, they'd say. We'll swat them like flies. But by 1945, those same men, if they were still alive, watched the skies over Berlin and saw not comedy, but inevitability. They'd underestimated not just a plane, but a people. They'd mistaken loud, rough-edged youth for weakness. They'd mistaken optimism for ignorance. They'd mistaken faith for foolishness. And that was their undoing. Because in every Liberator cockpit sat men who didn't care about appearances. They cared about the mission, about each other, about getting home. And that kind of determination can't be shot down. Even in failure, the Liberator crews inspired something bigger. Their courage fueled innovation. The long-range design of the B-24 laid the foundation for the next generation of transport aircraft. Its wings, its fuel system, its bomb load capacity, all influenced Cold War bombers and post-war cargo planes. The C-87 transport variant carried supplies across the Himalayas, the infamous hump route, feeding China's war effort against Japan. The PB-4Y-2 privateer, a naval version, patrolled oceans well into the 1950s. The B-24's DNA lived on in aircraft that carried food instead of bombs, mercy instead of destruction. And that transformation, that shift from war machine to lifeline, was perhaps its greatest victory. In the post-war years, men who had flown Liberators built new lives. They became engineers, teachers, farmers, and fathers. They built homes, raised children, and carried with them the quiet wisdom of those who had looked death in the eye. They knew arrogance was fragile. They knew laughter can turn to silence in a heartbeat. And they knew that sometimes, the things people mock at first, the ugly, the awkward, the underestimated, are the very things that change the world. Every time a storm hits and an old transport plane battles through it, somewhere in that sound, there's a ghost of the B-24. Every time an underdog refuses to give up, there's the spirit of those airmen who flew through flak and fire to prove a point. That the measure of worth isn't how you look, or how others see you, it's what you do when it matters most. Jack Arnett lived long enough to see the moon landing on television in 1969. When Neil Armstrong's voice came through the static, "One small step for man," Jack smiled and whispered to himself, "We sure did learn how to fly." Tex passed away a few years later, his ashes scattered from a small plane over the same Nevada desert where the Liberators had once been scrapped. A handful of surviving bombers still exist today, restored, gleaming, kept alive by volunteers who refuse to let the memory fade. When one of them takes off, its 4 engines rumbling, old men in lawn chairs rise to their feet and salute. They're not just saluting the machine. They're saluting every friend who never came home. They're saluting the idea that faith and persistence can turn even ridicule into legacy. When those engines thunder to life, you can almost hear the ghosts of the past laughing back, not in arrogance, but in joy. The laughter of men who defied mockery, who proved the impossible possible, who turned insult into triumph. That is the heart of the Liberator's story. It wasn't the prettiest. It wasn't the fastest. It wasn't even the favorite. But it went the farthest. From the deserts of Africa to the oil fields of Ploesti, from the frozen skies of Berlin to the islands of the Pacific, it carried the same message. You can mock me. You can doubt me. You can call me names. But I will not stop. Because freedom doesn't need perfection. It needs endurance. The B-24 taught that better than any speech or slogan ever could. And maybe that's why, even today, when a veteran tells his grandson about the war, his eyes still light up when he says the name. Not because of glory, but because of gratitude. Because he remembers the roar of those engines, the rattle of the fuselage, the camaraderie that only comes from shared danger. He remembers the fear and the courage that came after it. He remembers what it felt like to fly something everyone said would fail, and to watch it win. The Liberator's story is America's story. Flawed, loud, doubted, underestimated, but unstoppable once it finds its purpose. It's a story that says, mockery doesn't define you. Failure doesn't end you. The world's laughter is just fuel for your next flight. So the next time someone tells you that you're not built for the task, that you're too slow, too odd, too out of your league, remember the B-24. Remember those boys who flew into walls of fire just to prove that the impossible could be done. Remember that distance and doubt are just numbers. And when you're ready to quit, think of that battered plane limping home on 2 engines, holes in its wings, still carrying its crew back through flak and storm. It didn't look like a hero, but it was. Because it refused to stop flying. That's what true strength looks like. Not perfection, but perseverance. The German aces never understood that. They thought dominance was about elegance, precision, beauty. The Americans showed them it was about grit, teamwork, and stubborn belief. That lesson still matters, on the ground, in life, in every struggle where someone tells you you can't. Because history isn't written by the ones who look the best. It's written by the ones who keep going when everything looks worst. The Liberator kept going. It reached Berlin when no one thought it could. It burned away arrogance and replaced it with awe. And even when it was melted down into scrap, its legacy remained in the steel of new planes, in the hearts of new generations, and in the faith of a world rebuilt from ashes. That's how the laughter ended. And that's how the Liberator truly lived up to its name. It liberated not just nations, but belief. It liberated the idea that anything or anyone underestimated can rise above the clouds. Even now, when you hear the distant hum of old engines on a quiet afternoon, listen closely. You might still hear them, the voices of those men, carried on the wind, laughing again. Not the laughter of arrogance this time. The laughter of victory. The laughter of freedom. And maybe, just maybe, the laughter of a B-24 climbing through the smoke, engines steady, wings unbroken, heading once more into the sun.